need all this money because if you don't have a known entity, like a face that's running, you need to spend money on making them famous. So that's, I think, a big problem.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. I mean, I've funded some politicians myself, and, I know roughly how much it costs to sort of like join the House or join the Senate, and it's disgusting. And, it's just such a sad state of affairs because generally, to paraphrase South Park, you're choosing between a turd sandwich and a giant douche. And the only way that they've become palatable is through the campaign finance sort of process, as well as through the process of just the parties sort of pushing the candidates. If you actually had people who were already well-known and who were already like, oh, I know what that guy stands for. I followed that person for years. I like that person. And they're not politicians. They don't care for that. I think that's the better way to go about things. I think, the idea of a teacher joining Congress is such a good one because all we have is lawyers. They don't represent America. There's only 1 million lawyers in America, but Congress is 90% lawyers. Why is Congress all lawyers? It's something that really bothers me.
So how do we take out the money portion out of politics? And on top of it, if you have somebody who, say, a billionaire is running, well, they're less likely to, say, be influenced, maybe less likely to be influenced by anything to do with money, where somebody who doesn't make very much might be more influenced, but not necessarily because it depends on integrity. But how do you eliminate the financial hindrances that you have right now, where it's like, unless you have money or recognition, or ideally both, you really can't run and have any chance of winning?
I think that the nice thing about what I'm trying to do here is that I acknowledge that I can't solve every problem, and there are huge amounts of problems in our country, in our government, and all kinds of things like that. And I just don't have the answer for all of them. There's one thing I am an expert on, or maybe one or two things, and I'm not an expert on anything else. I don't know much about energy. I don't know anything about foreign policy. I couldn't point to Afghanistan on a map, but I do know a lot about financial statements, and I do know a lot about business and healthcare, and I know that our country's going broke. And I know that we're not going to have a country to talk about if we keep spending more money than we bring in, and if we keep asking the debt markets to support our bonds. It's really a disaster in the making. Every great empire has had the same thing happen to it. This is how they fail. There's arrogance that, we'll always be number one, and nobody will ever not buy our debt. And of course, it happened to the Netherlands. It happened to London. It happened in different empires across time. That arrogance stretches into peril. Russia went bankrupt in '98. Argentina, Venezuela gone bankrupt multiple times. Greece went bankrupt. It can happen to us. And I think that by spending more money than you have is a fast way to do that. I think we need to get back to a couple of years of surplus. We haven't had a surplus since Bill Clinton. Those are the things I know about. When it comes to reforming politics, look, it's a huge problem. It's been a problem before me. It'll be a problem after me. And I don't pretend I'm Superman. I don't pretend that I know everything and I can fix everything and I have a plan for everything, which is another part of the problem with our politicians, is that, in Congress, you're asked to know everything and understand everything and have a plan for everything. And the reality is, look, nobody is that smart. Nobody is that well informed. Nobody's really that good. And at the end of the day, it's, we're better off sort of being specialists at what we do know and having folks who trust each other. And I think that, if there was somebody in Congress that I really trust in foreign policy, I'd probably just vote with them. And I think that,
finding a good team, right? Knowing what you don't know, surrounding yourself with people who might. But I think it's sad that we don't have, I think there'd be a lot more trust in institutions right now if people said, listen, I don't know this, or listen, I thought this was the right action and I was wrong. This is how I'm going to do things differently. All the things you're expected to do, by the way, in a job interview, right?
Right. Yeah, no, it's a sad thing, but at the same time, the people want answers and they want good plans, and they should want that and have that. But that's also something where, look, the president's part of the president's job is to make those cases and advocate for them. And if the president puts forward a good case, whether it's Democrat or Republican, and it makes sense to me, then I vote yes. If they don't, and they don't support it, and I don't either, I'll vote no. It's just a matter of kind of what what speaks to us individually, not what speaks to us as a party. And if you go against the party, you're not going to get your funding. They're going to put up somebody really good against you. All this stuff that's just nonsense. I've been in New York my whole life. I was born here, raised here, never left New York City. Lived in almost every borough. Go to Long Island all the time, and I know our city, and I know what's good for it. And I've got extreme name recognition here. I get stopped in the street every day. The other people who are running in this election, I've never heard of them. I looked at their names once. I don't even know who they are. I literally cannot campaign against them because I don't know who they are. And I think that, it's going to be the party's jobs to get these people popular in 60 days. They're not going to be able to do that. Nobody's going to remember these people. The only person on the ballot anyone's going to recognize is me. And I think that means I'm going to win. But ultimately, I need to get those ballots in, those petitions in. So if you live in the Long Island area or you know somebody who does, tell them to go to ny3election.com, fill out the form. It'll take you 5 minutes and mail it in. I have 2 places to mail it into, in Albany and in Mineola.
Can you repeat that? Because I'm going to post it to the thing and put it on the
Jumbotron. It's a NY3, so it's a 3rd district, ny3election.com. And register to vote. You have to be registered. That takes 5 minutes. Register to vote, and then go ahead and fill the form out. And you can actually mail it in, apparently, and you can also hand it in. And we can get those done. And with a few thousand of those, we will be on the ballot. If I'm on the ballot, we'll win. And I will troll and I will meme Congress until the end of the earth, because these are the new tools we have to communicate. Memes are not just a child's play. The term meme was invented at MIT. And the idea of a mimetic transfer of information is pretty complicated. It's the way we transfer information today. And through this new way of transferring information, we get to expose some of the fallacies and some of the problems that we have in government. And some of them are funny, which is an important element of being able to transfer information. But some of them are also very serious. And the question is, again, why are there politicians who make millions of dollars? Talking about the teacher, talking about the plumber, talking about the electrician running for Congress. Nobody like that runs for Congress because it's a privileged elite system. It's a system for people who are in the know, whose family was in Congress before, who are top lawyers from top law schools. It's not for you and me. I grew up in Brooklyn to a family of sanitation workers and janitors and middle managers and doormen and things like that. My parents come from Albania. They didn't speak English very well. They came here and they had 4 kids, and they created the American dream for me, and I'm very grateful for that. And I think that
By the way, I like your new profile picture. And by the way, I tried to invite John Reedstark. You know him. He was the former SEC chief of Internet Enforcement and such, and he would have loved to actually join the room today, but he said he has to go shopping with his wife and daughter, or else he will get in trouble with us. But it sounds really interesting. He says hi.
Yeah, government is too big. We end up having such a big government that we end up going after things. And again, I want to make this personal, but I certainly know my prosecution. But another prosecution that was really interesting is the so-called Varsity Blues prosecution, where the FBI went after, no joke, went after people who were cheating on their SATs and parents who helped get their kids into colleges they didn't deserve to get into. Now, look, I don't think that's a good thing. And I've made fun of people like that their whole lives because their kids don't end up being any more successful just because they went to a certain college. If your kid's not going to be successful, they're not going to be successful. It's not going to make a difference. But, rich parents want the best for their kids. And they sometimes bend the rules to get their kids into the right places. And the FBI opened an investigation and arrested 100 people over this. Almost nobody went to jail. A couple of people went to jail for a few weeks. This was not a good use of government resources. And, maybe this investigation cost $5 million, but at the end of the day, it's not about $5 million. It's about this general attitude towards not prioritizing, not thinking about it like a business, not prioritizing what do we want out of the FBI. Do we want them to go after the worst criminals, the crimes that affect real people every day, or do we want them investigating who cheated on their SAT? It's really just something that the reason this is happening is the FBI is too big. They've gone after all the real crime. They've went after it. So at this point, they're inventing crimes to go after. It's really just gotten to a point where there's too much resources in the FBI. The same thing applies to the NSA. The same thing applies to the CIA. The same thing applies to the the FDA, the DOJ, all of these groups have too much to do on their hands. The SEC, you mentioned the guy at the SEC. I think the SEC has to exist, for better or worse. Somebody has to regulate.
Given your history with securities regulation, I'm surprised that you're even being that gracious.
Well, I think the publicly traded companies have to be monitored because ultimately there is an incentive to lie, steal, and cheat. And we have a great public market, it's the best in the world. And I think it should largely be limited to that. The publicly traded companies, the Apples, the Microsofts, and the smaller companies should have to file their 10Qs and 10Ks with the SEC, but the SEC could probably be 80 to 90% smaller. And the funny thing about fraud is that we have 5 or 6 different organizations that are all responsible for fraud. You have the SEC on the civil side, you have the CFPB and the CFTC on the civil side, but then you have the DOJ and on the criminal side, as well as other organizations that can bring charges. The Secret Service can bring charges, the HHS can bring charges, and it's just a whole amalgamation of like...
The CFTC...
I don't think they can bring criminal ones, but I think that like the whole point of...
The DOJ can do criminal, I believe.
Yes,
right?
The Secret Service, the post office inspector can arrest you. There's a couple of funny ones. The HHS, Department of Homeland Security, DHS. Yeah.
DHS.
Yep.
Those make sense. The post office, though? Really?
Post office inspector.
Really?
They have a fraud division within the post office. They come up with some pretty good stuff, actually. It's like very underfunded, I think, but they actually can arrest you for all kinds of fraud. And believe it or not, they do a decent job. But the point is, like, we're looking for fraud in places that doesn't exist. There was an arrest of a very prominent Google engineer, very famous, very wealthy guy who helped create the self-driving car industry. And he left Google's Waymo to go to Uber, and they arrested him. They said, "You're stealing trade secrets." And it's this power between big companies and big law firms and government. And in this case, I hate the word deep state because it makes me sound like a QAnon conspiracy theorist. But the deep state of the prosecutor's office, prosecutors are not elected. And, if a big law firm person gets a call from Google, Google's a $20 million account at Cooley or whatever other law firm, and that big law firm says, "Oh, we want to keep Google happy, don't we?" Of course we do. So what do the people at Google want? Well, they're telling us there's a guy who just left Google to go to a competitor, and that sucks for Google. Well, what can we do about it? Well, we can sue the guy. No, we need something bigger than that. Well, let's get the guy arrested. How are we going to get the guy arrested? I don't know. Theft of trade secrets? Well, what prosecutor is going to do that? Oh, well, I went to law school with John, and I was in the prosecutor's office with John for a couple of years. And, John's probably going to want a job after he does his government rounds, and he's going to want a multi-million-dollar job here at our firm. So let's go arrest this guy, and or tell him to do that. And then a couple of years later, you know what? He'll be over here at this law firm or that law firm, and he'll be making millions of dollars. And that's the way it works. Goldman Sachs had a quant trader who left Goldman Sachs, Russian guy, left Goldman Sachs to join a hedge fund, took computer code with him, okay? He emailed himself computer code to his personal account. The FBI said that was an attempt to steal trade secrets. The guy did 7 years in prison. He said, "I don't know what you're talking about. I sent this email to myself to work on this buggy code Goldman Sachs asked me to because I'm a programmer. That's literally my job. And this code actually sucks. We would never use this at our hedge fund. It's way undercooked. It's not good enough. But I'm just trying to do my job, and all of a sudden I've got arrested for stealing trade secrets." And he was found guilty, or he pled guilty actually. And he got a 7-year sentence. I mean, it was really insane. So the power that a Goldman Sachs or Google has over a law firm, which has power over a prosecutor's office, has gotten to a point of insanity where not only that, take a look at Letitia James, our Attorney General here in New York, our aspiring governor, or AG, or Attorney General, depending on how you look at it. She uses her power exclusively to beat up on the other party, which again, it's not a problem if you're a Democrat. I have a lot of friends that are Democrats, but they don't use their power just to mess with Republicans. And Republicans shouldn't use their power just to mess with Democrats. It's really the sign of a country going down the tubes when that starts to happen. Because, your job as Attorney General is really important. You're the top cop of the state. Your job should be stopping fentanyl from coming in, stopping, robberies I had a friend, he's in here right now. We work together. He's not from New York. He's from what some people would call flyover state. And he came to New York and he goes to CVS and he says, why is everything behind glass? Why is everything behind locks? This doesn't happen where I'm from. And I said, well, welcome to New York. This is a crime-ridden city. It's a crime-ridden state. And our AG doesn't want to have anything to do with it because she's busy prosecuting me, Trump, the NRA, everyone other than the people that are threatening our security. I take the subway to work every day, and every day on the subway I see some person who's screaming, who's on drugs, who's threatening people, and I always see a little old lady getting scared, grabbing her pocketbook and bringing it closer to her, and I sit here and say, why does it have to be this way? It's a really terrible state of affairs, and it's something that instead of arresting people like that, Letitia James wants to arrest Donald Trump for God knows what, and look, you don't have to be a Trump fan. I'm not necessarily a Trump fan myself, but it's a huge waste of resources and huge waste of time to arrest the guy for paying for Stormy Daniels or something like that, or lying about it.
I have a question for you. More significantly in my head, the use of the judicial system to promote judicial activism is what I feel like she does. And I think it's a very, very dangerous precedent to set, especially since, that's why we're supposed to have 3 branches of government.
Right.
We have an executive branch and then working with that already has, a huge influence on the media.
I'm so happy you said that.
Like a lot of the media narrative. Then we have judges that are acting as activists. It seems to be a very scary place that we live in.
I am so happy you said that because I've seen it myself. Where the Supreme Court is the last place, it's the last line of defense in our country. Our executive branch is bought for and sold, I think. Our Congress is as well. And the only place that can be kind of kept sacred is the court system, which is also now falling to these pernicious things. We have judges that don't care about the law. I was in a court case recently, and generally, I would say 8 or 9 times out of 10, my judges are fair. But I was in a court case recently where the judge didn't even look at any of our evidence, didn't care. She knew I was guilty right away. This is a civil case. And it was against the government. And I didn't get a single chance to get a word in. And we're preying on relief from appeals court and the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can't look at every case. It's only 9 people. And the appeals court is your last chance. If the appeals court gets it wrong, you're cooked. And we have judges that will acquit or convict people like Trump, people like me, and even people like you because they feel like it. And the judge is the closest thing to God in America. They're permanent appointments. They never can be removed. It's something that's really aggressive, and we're seeing politics start to poison the courts. And maybe they've always been poisoned. But the Supreme Court we have now is very much similar to kind of what I'm thinking, that the government's too big. They are trying to dismantle, thankfully, big parts of the government. The recent Supreme Court decision in AMG versus FTC basically stripped the FTC of all its powers, which is incredibly good news in my opinion. The SEC v. Liu decision stripped the SEC of disgorgement power, which is a huge tool they used. They created, like you said, Nora, they created that tool out of thin air. Because they interpreted the law their way, and they said, you know what?
If people aren't familiar with Martin's case, I'm someone who just is, before I ever knew Martin, I just looked into, there's a lot of misconceptions about, what he was prosecuted for. He was actually prosecuted under an obscure securities law for allegedly, misleading his investors, who made a lot of money, by the way. In fact, he couldn't have even been sued civilly for what he was criminally prosecuted for, because in order for that to happen, there has to be monetary damages. When you mislead investors and then, there's a breach of fiduciary duty and they lose money as a result, that's the damages. They made a bunch of money, actually. So they sued him under this very obscure securities law that was, in my opinion, when I read about it, I said, this is scary, because everyone is scared that someone, is prosecuted, especially someone who's like a young individual who, you're not in a huge position of power at the time. When this is something that, raising drug prices, big pharma, okay, as if that's not something that they do, or like, you know, charge exorbitant fees and for any name brand drug or anything that is patented. This is something that's done all the time. I pay a ludicrous amount of money, even with really expensive private health insurance, and Amgen has to supplement, you know, the cost of my copay, because even with private insurance, the copay for my heart medication that I need to take every single month, you know, for its the, you know, indication is chronic heart failure. Otherwise, it would be, I don't even know what it'd be astronomical. Even if you just go to those coupon programs and have worse insurance, the copay is something around $400 or $500. And I don't know why no one's vilifying, you know, anyone for that, because it happens all the time, by the way. It was under a securities law that he was prosecuted, and a very, very vague one at that, and it was applied in such a way that, like I said, he wouldn't have even been able to be civilly sued, yet somehow was criminally prosecuted.
Yeah, it was one of the first times ever that a prosecutor used a fraud statute for somebody who did not cause any losses to somebody. And in fact,
I believe it. Right?
I also have... I have another first.
I'll be honest, like for me, when I was hearing the story at the time, and I don't remember all the details anymore, but I will say that my opinion, though, in terms of misleading investors' history, they didn't lose money, but they could have. So I do think probably the prosecution itself happened for more political reasons than, you know, really worrying about victims. I think that's the problem and problematic. I do think, though, even if, you know, sometimes the consequences of somebody lying to investors are going to be positive for them, right? They don't necessarily want to lose their
that
money,
is true.
And I'm not saying that's what happened.
No, yeah. And I think...
It was even basically more like, honestly, Martin, exaggerating his resume to the fact, you know, misrepresenting himself and his credentials and how well his fund was doing, you know. But we're basically, you know, saying like he went to a better school or
well,
something.
all that's very serious.